I'm very pleased to be here. I want to thank also Danny and all the organization. That was a great conference, and I learned a lot. I think you learned a lot also. So I will deliver maybe a long speech. I'm not used to speak for 35 minutes or something like that, but it's so important that I want you to know all the challenges that we have in this country. But before, there are two nicknames that people have given me over the years, and you may know these two nicknames: Mad Max and the Albertan from Quebec. But it would seem very appropriate in a situation like this one today to merge them. I could become the Mad Albertan from Quebec. Like you, and that's serious, like you, I'm mad. I'm mad about the Liberals in Ottawa. I'm mad about what's happening with our politicians. And I'm mad about the Liberal arrogance, about their policies that are dividing us. And like you, I feel your frustration, and I'm mad. Many of the speakers since yesterday have identified specific problems that afflict our country and that explain the rise of separatist sentiment here in Western Canada. But before I address the political challenge of fixing Canada, which is the title of my presentation today, let me give you my big picture perspective on why we are in this situation. A nation must be based on a sense of belonging, of participating in a common project, sharing the same values and interests. Canada has the second largest landmass in the world after Russia. We are not ethnically or linguistically homogeneous. We have very diverse regional cultures. And yet, our predecessor, the father of our Constitution, understood that despite our many differences, we had common values and interests that justify sticking together. That's why they created federal institution to govern the British North America colonies as opposed to a unitary state. It's been quite a success if you look at it from a global perspective. We have been for a century and a half one of the most peaceful, stable, and prosperous countries in the world. Yes, we must be proud of that. But that doesn't mean everything has been perfect. Otherwise, we would not be here today. And to me, the reason is obvious. It is because we did not respect our Constitution. We did not respect what the father of our country wanted. And it's a division of powers between provinces and the federal government. Because the federal government, especially since the 1970s, never stopped growing. Most of us here are small C conservatives. We believe in smaller government because we believe in individual freedom. We believe in personal responsibility. We believe that more wealth will become with a smaller government and more personal freedom. We oppose big government because it makes us less free and less prosperous. But in a federal country, like our country, the growth of government has another negative consequence. It distorts federalism. It creates tensions and even more divisions. Until the 1970s, Canada had always had a relatively modest government, just like the United States. To distinguish Canada from the US, Canadian nationalists, and by that I mean mostly Trudeau liberals and the cultural and intellectual left, invented the myth of a social democratic Canada with its exclusive welfare states, its interventionist economic policies, and its cultural protectionism. The 1970s and early 1980s were the era of big deficit and the growth of government in Ottawa. The era of increased federal intervention in healthcare and education, the era of national, and I think you know that, the National Energy Program, the era of centralization and nationalization, the era when the federal government was growing like wildfire. Under Pierre Trudeau, total government spending went from $13 billion to $109 billion, and from 17% of our GDP to 24%. Our national debt went from 25% of our GDP in 1968 to 43% in 1984. It was also the era when separatism became mainstream in both Quebec and Alberta. The PQ became the official opposition in 1970s, formed the government in 1976, and held its first referendum in 1980. And Albertans elected for the first time at the provincial level a separatist in 1982. In a large and diverse federation like our country, the fastest way to breed resentment and disunity is to have a big central government intervening in provincial affairs, being perceived as favoring the interests of some regions against those of others, and unfairly redistributing wealth from some regions to others. Separatism in Quebec and discontent in the West grew faster during the era of Pierre Trudeau as a reaction against central government activism. And it is no coincidence if it is once again growing under a government headed by a son who shares his vision. The current Trudeau government has added $70 billion to our national debt and plans to add $90 billion more in the next 4 years. These deficits should not be happening in a period of economic growth. They only serve to grow the size of the government and buy votes with borrowed money. The Trudeau government is planning to once again use its so-called spending power to interfere and intervene in provincial jurisdiction with the creation of a national farmer care program, a national daycare program, and with more money to local infrastructures and housing, which are provincial responsibilities. It is continuing to redistribute money from richer to poorer provinces to the tune of $20 billion this year, with an equalization program that keeps growing despite the inequities it creates. In addition to imposing a carbon tax, Trudeau is doing everything it can to slow down the growth of the oil and gas industry and make the economy the economic situation here in Alberta even worse. So, should the West copy Quebec? There is a big misunderstanding about Quebec's situation that needs to be cleared. Many people here in the West believe they should take example from Quebec. They think that Quebec's experience with separatism has brought benefits to the province, that Quebec always gets what it wants because of this separatist threat. But that's not how I see it. We have a constitution that leaves a lot of autonomy to provinces. If we respected the division of powers presented by our constitution, Canada would be a lot less centralized than it is today. And the federal government would be much smaller. However, between the two extreme options of separatism and centralized federation, the view of a decentralized federation with more autonomous provinces never became a reality, even though it is the one favored by a majority of Quebecers. Asking our partners in Ottawa and in other provinces that we cease to violate our constitution should be the easiest position to defend, but it was always badly defended. For 50 years, successive Quebec governments have weakened it by constantly asking for special privileges. They demanded that Quebec be recognized as a distinct society and that this distinction serve to interpret our constitution. That Quebec get more seats in parliament than what is democratic weight warrant. That only Quebec get a veto on constitutional changes. And all these demands were made with a knife on throat. You better say yes, or else we will leave. Moreover, Quebec constitutional demands were coupled with demands for more money, for more transfer, more equalization payments to feed its big provincial government. This contradicted the wish for more autonomy, the wish for Quebec being independent. Quebec has remained financially dependent on the rest of the country. It is the case today. The current budget surplus of the Quebec government does not mean that the province has suddenly become rich. Quebecers are still poorer than Westerners and Ontarians. Quebec has one of the biggest and most interventionist governments in North America. One of the heaviest fiscal burdens, it still has a large accumulated debt. The moral authority that Quebec politicians could have mustered by asking for our constitution to be respected was repeatedly compromised with these unrealistic demands. After two referendums that ended in defeat for separatist forces in Quebec, Quebec has no negotiation power anymore. Yes, a majority of Quebecers don't want to separate. Despite the rebirth of the Bloc Québécois, nobody in Quebec believes a referendum could be won anytime soon. And we are once again facing a centralizing government in Ottawa that wants to spend more and intervene more in provincial jurisdiction. There are many Canadians in every region of our country who share the vision of a society less dominated by a big government in Ottawa, or a society of a less centralized federation, especially here in West, here in Alberta. Quebecers who want more autonomy for Quebec should have allied with them, with you, instead of making unrealistic demands on Ottawa and on the rest of the country. My recommendation is the same for Westerners. You must find allies in Quebec and elsewhere with people who believe in a smaller government in Ottawa if you want to bring about change at the federal level. Don't focus on the arrogant statements made by the Bloc Québécois leader. He only represents a minority, a tiny minority of Quebecers. In 2012, only 1% of Quebec's oil came from Western Canada, only 1%. Today, it's about 44%. The Quebec government supports Alberta in its Supreme Court challenge against Ottawa's carbon tax. Many people in Quebec and in the maritime provinces are not happy like you about being a poor province that depend on the equalization. They understand that it is a poverty trap. They would prefer to bring economic growth and prosperity. Yes, equalization, it is a poverty trap. There's no incentive for other provinces like Quebec, like New Brunswick, to develop their own natural resources. Because if they develop their own natural resources, they will receive less equalization money. We need to change that. We created the People's Party to give a voice to these people across the country who want change and are willing to work together to bring it about. But I want to tell you, I understand why many of you are angry at Ottawa, Quebec, and the rest of the country. I understand your frustration, and you have the right to be frustrated. But you won't be able to change this country if all of you do is threaten to leave when things get really bad, like right now, and support the status quo the rest of the time. I hear people saying, Maxime, this time we really mean it. Either there are real changes or we will separate. After the defeat of the Meek-Lake Accord in 1990, polls were showing a majority of Quebecers were contemplating separation. The no side, as you know, still won the referendum in 1995. And nothing changed. Ottawa did not say yes to the Quebec's demands. You could spend several decades trying to organize a separatist movement. It is a huge undertaking. I know people in my own province in Quebec who spend most of their lives fighting for Quebec to become independent. Moreover, if your logic is, let's create a separatist movement like Quebec to exert pressures on Ottawa. Even though we don't really want to separate, you are not going to go very far. The threat has to be credible to work. A large minority of Quebecers don't feel Canadian at all. Jacques Parizeau really wanted to create a new country, not to reform Canada. But I have the impression that there are very few Westerners who don't feel Canadian, who don't really want to separate. The first choice is always to fix this country. And I like that. And we must admit such a weak threat will probably not increase the bargaining power of the West against Ottawa. If separatism failed to achieve much that was beneficial in Quebec, despite a more credible threat, imagine what it will accomplish here. What it will create for sure is a lot of division and resentment among Westerners. You will likely find yourself in a very negative political dynamic, one based on failed attempts to blackmail Ottawa, internal divisions, and resentments against the rest of the country, just like in Quebec. There are ways for Alberta to become more autonomous in some areas, like Quebec. Alberta could have its own police force, its own revenue agency, its own pension plans. I support this. Alberta could also have specific agreements on shared jurisdiction with Ottawa, like manpower training and selection of immigrants, like Quebec. The panel appointed by Premier Kenney will look at these proposals. The reason only Quebec got these special arrangements is not because of separatist blackmail. It's because other provinces were not interested and never asked for it. Quebec always defended provincial autonomy, and you can do the same. Yes. But I understand this won't bring new pipelines or reform the equalization program. I understand that. It won't stop the federal government from intruding even more in healthcare, education, and other provincial jurisdictions. It won't bring about a streamlined federal government that spends less, does not increase on national debt, and focuses on national problems. These changes need to be made at the federal level. 30 years ago, a new party, the Reform Party, offered specific measures to decentralize the Federation and reduce the size of the central government. I read the platform, I read the Reform platform, the Blue Book, which was the program of the Reform Party, and other documents from that time. Many of these solutions are very similar to what I've been talking about during the last election and what the People's Party proposes in its platform. The Reform Party became the official opposition in 1997, but it did not successfully do a successful transition from a Western protest party to a national party. It never managed to make an inroad in Quebec or in Ontario, where it was, especially in Quebec, where it was widely perceived as anti-Quebec and anti-French. Many people were attracted to its policies in Ontario and in Atlantic Canada, but they didn't vote for the reform because they saw the Reform Party as a regional Western party. And I must admit, I have great respect and admiration for what Mr. Manning has done. Yes. But unfortunately, he never became fluent in French and could not speak directly to Quebecers to counter this negative perception and explain how reform policies could be advantageous to Quebec. This is unfortunate because I think reform could have had a chance to grow even more and eventually form government if it had emphasized its small government principle and decentralizing policies in both official languages in a way that could appeal to conservatives in all regions of this country. However, even in the opposition, it was influential enough to push the Chrétien government to adopt major reforms / bureaucracy, to adopt major reform also to have a smaller government, get rid of the deficit, and start reducing the debt. I would say the Chrétien government was the most fiscal conservative government of the past half-century in Canada. Reform could have had a major influence on Canada's governance if it had remained a truly principled, small c conservative and decentralist party, whether or not it formed government. The reform experiment proved that bold and consistent policies don't need to be watered down to appeal to a substantial portion of Canadian voters. We can only imagine what may have happened if the Reform Party had continued to consolidate its gains and made more systematic effort to appeal to Quebecers and Easterners. Instead, that was a mistake. Reform ended up merging with the old Progressive Conservative Party and diluting its bold policies. It became more centrist. And when the new Conservative Party formed the government under Prime Minister Stephen Harper, it did not implement any of the bold reform that the Reform Party was speaking about. I'm proud of having been a minister in this government and what we achieved. But let's be frank, the Harper government increased equalization payments. It increased transfer payments from healthcare. It continued to subsidize and bail out businesses. It did not curtail the size of the government in any meaningful way. It was a good manager of a big government. What we need to solve our unity problems and make our federation work better is a good manager of a smaller government a smaller government less intrusive in provincial jurisdiction, a smaller government in Ottawa that will respect our Constitution. And that's why we are here today discussing this today. The Reform Party experiment failed. Nothing significant has changed. The relentless march of big government has resumed with Justin Trudeau. And we are faced with the same political challenges to fix Canada. So, what are your options now here in Western Canada? First is the Wexit option. I have explained why I believe it is not the right one. Westerners should not repeating the mistake Quebecers made. Then there is the option of the centrist, pragmatic, conservative party under Andrew Scheer or another leader, when another leader that maybe will even be weaker. Westerners massively supported this party last month. It got them nowhere. Even if Andrew Scheer had won the election, not much would have changed. Scheer's only program was to buy votes. He was promising more money for health care and would not have ended federal intrusions in provincial jurisdiction. He would not have reformed the equalization formula. He would not have used the Constitution to approve pipelines. He would have adopted some kind of price on carbon and would have spent more money to fight climate change. He would have continued to spend almost as much as the Liberals and was planning deficits for many more years. And I'm not even talking about immigration, free speech, and all the other issues where the Conservatives essentially adopted the Liberal position. I know, the election campaign is over, but it was important to repeat it once again. And now the Conservatives have lost. What do we hear? Calls from all sides for the party to become even more centrist and pragmatic, to reconcile itself with endless deficit, to become more politically correct, to have a more ambitious climate change plan, to have a more developed healthcare and social vision, which simply means to spend more and intervene more in provincial jurisdiction. Many of you in this room voted Conservative. That's okay. For now. Yeah. I'm sorry to have to break the news to you, but if the Conservative Party takes this ultra-centrist road, as is very likely to do, you're screwed. And even if they get elected next time, they won't have any mandate for change. They will be hostage to all the interest groups whose support they will have bought with promises. Think the dairy cartel. They have no, and maybe they won't be even good managers of a bigger government. Now, it may be a little bit presumptuous of me to say this after last month's election. Yeah, the result was not so strong for us. But if you compare that with the Green Party, it took the Green 20 years and 6 elections to have 1.6% of the votes. We did that in 1 year, so not too bad. But knowing that result, I still believe that the only option to fix Canada is the one offered by a principled party willing to propose bold reforms like our party, the People's Party. A national party that does not pit one region of the country against another, but rather sells these reforms as good for all Canadians. The People's Party offers you a way out of the bad policies that feed Western alienation. The People's Party would take away the reason to flirt with separation. It was, and we were, and the People's Party is the only party, and I'm the only leader, who was willing to use the Constitution to approve pipelines. And I said it even when speaking in French in Quebec. And I'm the only leader who rejected the Paris Accord. And will not impose any tax or regulation. The only federal leader who would make equalization, listen to it, less generous and make it fair for every province. The only federal leader who will strongly promote provincial autonomy and respect provincial jurisdiction. Canada is becoming an increasingly divided and dysfunctional country, and the re-election of the Liberals will make things even worse. The left has been pushing its radical ideas for decades, and guess what? What sounded radical decades ago is now the new orthodoxy. They keep pushing for more. They never back down. They are always on the offensive. They adopt new programs that become untouchable. They promise the moon to everyone and pay for it with borrowed money. And then getting rid of these programs and deficit become untakeable. Instead of fighting this trend and offering a principled alternative, the conservatives move even more to the left. We must stop compromising. We must keep defending our ideas, even if it means we are not mainstream enough in today's political culture to form a government. Our first aim should be to be loyal to our ideas. And our first aim also should be to become an intransigent minority that's big enough to force everyone to debate its proposals.
Yeah.
And then big enough to pull the political center of gravity to our side, like the Reform Party did, and continue to do so without diluting our ideas for short-term electoral gains, like the merge between the Reform and the Conservative did. Or else, another generation will still be discussing the same problems another 25 years from now. That's the political challenge we have to fix our country. That's the choice. That's our choice. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Question, okay, the tough questions.
Questions, yes. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Merci beaucoup. Good. Now you've heard all of the 7 French words I know, but Paul, are you getting the mic? Anybody got a question? Here we are. There, they're lining up. Good for you. I'll tell you in a minute. Great speech. Thank you very much. That was great. Did you feel good? Yeah, good. Oh,
Yes.
They're just waiting to get the camera set up. He wants to get the questions too. So. Just while they're setting up the camera, I'm going to tell Max we got him a little gift for him and Catherine that they might take home, that if they've got any friends from Quebec that they might like to trigger some night. We got him a nice pair of socks that says, if you can read this, send our $600 billion back. I think you can wear them at the cottage. Okay, good. We're good to go. Okay, first question. Go ahead, sir.
Thank you, Danny.
You're welcome. Yes.
Mr. Bernier, it's great to see you here in Alberta, and you being here tonight speaks louder than any words that can be spoken. So thank you for coming and showing that in physically you are here and you care about Albertans. Now,
In the country.
At the country, yes.
Now I want to make some difficult questions for you.
You better ask them quick because we don't have a lot of time.
First question is, when I phoned your headquarters during the federal election campaign, after hours, but it was still the only language that was answered on the recording was in French.
No. So first of all, yes, you're right. We did, that was in the beginning, and we did change that. If you call right now, you have not an answering machine. You have a person that will answer your question in English and in French.
Okay, and one second question really quickly. What are you doing to ensure your new party is not infiltrated by our enemies in this early stages? And even during your choosing of candidates, you wanted to fill every riding, I understand that. But what have you done? What has your staff done to ensure that your party is not becoming infiltrated, which they do, by our enemies?
First of all, They won because all people who support us, and if they want to be on the executive of a riding association, they must pledge and they must sign a pledge that they believe in the values of our party, the 4 principles: individual freedom, personal responsibility, respect, and fairness. And that platform, it's based on all these principles. But there's no compromise with that platform. I don't want to waste my time. You know, I'm in politics for the last 13 years, and what the platform of the People's Party is the platform that we put forward when I was running for the leadership of the Conservative Party of Canada 3 years ago. It's based on real conservative value. It's based on the reform platform. That platform won't change. It is the platform, the foundation of our party, and everybody that will come, they must approve that platform.
Thank you. Next question, Terry. Thank you.
Name's Terry Elko. I'm from Lloydminster. Mr. Bernier, I heard yesterday people talked about term limits for elected politicians. What's your thoughts on elected terms, or on term limits for bureaucrats?
I like the question because, you know, when I was in government, I'll try to be short, there's 2 kinds of ministers. And I want to tell you an anecdote about that, and I will answer your questions. I was industry minister, and after that I had a promotion to be foreign affairs minister. I had a good relationship with Ted Rogers, and now he's not with us anymore. But we did a big deregulation in telecom, more free markets, more freedom. And after that, you know, I went to foreign affairs, and I received a call from Ted Rogers maybe a week after being the foreign affairs minister. And Ted Rogers called me and he said, Maxime, I'm hearing very bad things about you in Toronto, in boardrooms in Toronto. I said, what do you mean? I said, you know, your former deputy minister, the civil servant, your former deputy minister were saying to everybody that he's very pleased that Maxime Bernier is not the industry minister anymore because you are not listening to him. I said, oh, he's saying that? I said, Ted, yes, that's a compliment. That's true. I was not listening to him. I was doing what is right for this country, more freedom and less government and less bureaucrats. That's why he's mad at me. But there's 2 kinds of ministers in Ottawa. The one that will control the department, and other one that will just say yes to their deputy minister. So yes, it will be good to have a term limit for deputy minister, but the best will be to have real politicians that fight for what they believe and fight against their own bureaucracy.
Thank you, Maxime. Next question.
Timon Piper from Red Deer. I met you yesterday, Mr. Bernier, and I'm grateful for your availability. I think in the West here we're confused of how to vote, and I admit that I had voted strategically and I didn't vote from my heart, and I believe in your policies. But what I wanted to say is and I'm admitting it, I'm up here admitting it. So what I'm trying to say is, you're saying you have all these reform policies, and I believe if there's a way that Quebec and Alberta could just bury their differences, bury the hatchet and unite, maybe the country could follow. Is there any way you could reach out to former reform parties, bring some of the reformers into your fold? Because if Alberta and Quebec could stand together, who could stop us? Do you have any comments about that, Mr. Bernier?
That's great. Actually, we have some. Paul was one of your candidates here in Red Deer, a former reformer, and we have former reformers that are with us. But when I'm speaking about Quebec, I want to be clear. There's a big distinction with the leader of the Bloc Québécois and the Premier of Quebec and Quebecers. The leader of the Bloc Québécois represents a tiny minority in Quebec, so he does not represent Quebecers. And the Premier of Quebec, about pipelines and equalization, mostly about pipelines, is listening to radical environmentalists. I can tell you that Quebecers, the individual Quebecers, understand that it's safer to transport oil and gas by pipelines and by train because of the huge tragedy that we had in Lac Mégantic maybe 6 years ago. They know that. They know that it's safer to transport oil and gas by pipelines. And also people in Montreal, they know that all the gas that is going to the Montreal Trudeau Airport from the Port of Montreal through downtown Montreal to the airport, the Trudeau Airport. It's coming by a pipeline. So it's supposed to be dangerous. In the center of Montreal, by a pipeline. They understand that. You just have to explain that to Quebecers. But it's only the politicians at the provincial level that don't understand that. So yes, you're right. We can unite us, people from Alberta and people from Quebec, for the good of this country.
Thank you very much. Quick question, we're really getting tight for time.
Hi, I'm Kim Sinnott from Red Deer, Alberta. There's a lot of businesses and banks that are moving their money offshore. I was wondering your thoughts and comments on that.
But actually, I spoke about the Quebec, the experience with separation and the independence. You know, in 1976, we lost a lot of head office in Montreal. A lot of money went to Toronto, and like a speaker said yesterday, Montreal was the financial city of Canada, and now it is Toronto. But when the PQ government was elected, that has a huge effect on investment in Quebec. So what we need to have more investment, yes, here in Alberta, all across the country. The way to solve that is to have policies, tax policies that will be more competitive. That's our proposal for our party. We need to have a flat tax on business at 10%. We need to have only 2 tax rates at the individual level. We need to abolish the capital gains tax in this country. If we do this reform, we'll have more investment, and that will bring more jobs here.
Gordon Miller from Ottawa. Mr. Bernier, thank you for being here. I tend to speculate about what would happen if the West, say Alberta, actually did achieve independence. Have you given any thought to what we might do with the rest of Canada in trying to pull things together? Tough question. I don't mean to put you on the spot, sir. Thank you.
No, it's okay. First of all, it won't happen in a couple of months from now. You know, Quebec, they spoke about the independence for more than 50 years. And Quebec is not an independent country, and I'm very pleased with that. That's good for the country. But if that happened, that will be very difficult for our country. That will be very difficult. I don't think that this country will exist anymore. So that's why I'm saying to your provincial government, I'm saying to Premier Kenney, do everything that you can do, like Quebec. Quebec was able to have all these agreements with Ottawa because it's under the provincial jurisdiction, and because Quebec always defended its own autonomy on provincial jurisdiction. That's not because we had a separatist government, or because we had a referendum. That's not the case. The case is that every Quebec government was always looking for more power in Quebec in the Federation. And I hope that Jason Kenney will do that. I hope that he will take a risk. I hope that you have a caisse de dépôt. I hope that you'll be able to control your immigration like Quebec. I hope that you'll have a new pension plan, one here in Alberta. So you can do this reform, do it. And after that, for the pipelines and the equalization, we will always fight for that.
One last question, please be quick, Milan.
Okay, my question is how exactly we would change the opinion of the vampire who is for 115 years sucking our blood and not knowing that that blood is not good for him, make him lazy and fat. And the problem is not only the vampire himself, who is basically imbecile in charge.
Milan, I didn't hear you say, we didn't hear the first part of that question.
Vampire.
Start, please.
Oh.
The what?
Vampire.
Oh, the
How
vampire.
exactly we would change opinion of the vampire who is sucking our blood for 115 years
He's talking about the vampire.
and is accustomed to suck the blood of the West?
Sucking the blood out of the West.
How one would explain to him, brainwag he is, that his blood is not actually good for him? It makes him fat, complacent, and immensely lazy.
No.
The problem is not only with the elected people, the government people, or people of Quebec. It's the entire East, the conglomerate of fools, the whores who would sell their own mother for a bowl of porridge. How do we change that?
Fair enough. So basically you're saying, how do we get the East to sort of stop voting for their self-interest and vote for the interest of Canada? Is that
Well,
correct?
he's saying that they're buying their votes very cheap.
Okay.
How do you stop it?
Yes, first of all, it's too bad, like I said in my speech, that the reform merged with the progressive conservative. You had the solution over there. The reform must have been a real national party, because what I'm speaking about, smaller government, more freedom, it can be and it is popular in other regions of this country. So we have to be out there like the left. The left are always speaking about more government and more interventionists, and they don't respect the Constitution. We must speak what about we believe with passion, with conviction, and we'll be able to convince other people all across the country. The reform was almost successful. We just need to do the same, and we are doing the same. I believe in this country and believe in Canadians, and we are doing a kind of education. That's right. But no compromise with our ideas, and just explain that to Canadians.